Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Apocalypse Doc, your doctor in the apocalypse, and we are doing another small YouTube tutorial. Today we are going to be designing a simple survival stat system. So what does that mean? Basically, in survival games, you'll have food, you'll have water, and they'll decrease over time, correct? That's what we're going to do today. So I've opened up my YouTube tutorial, and remember this is just based on the regular default template for the first person game. All right, and this is the same tutorial where we made that little interaction system. Okay, and today we're going to create a folder called stat system, or how about stats system? There we go. And then go ahead and open that folder, and we are going to add these stats to the character within another Blueprint class called an actor component. Okay, so go to Blueprint class, pick actor component, and we're going to call this BP underscore, and I use YTT for YouTube tutorial just in case you're using another asset pack that also has a component. And it's going to be called stats component. All right, so go ahead and open that, save that right away. And we're going to add a stat called food. All right, so go ahead and create a variable, make this a float, and we're going to name it food. Okay. Actually, we're going to call this current food. Okay, because this is going to be the player's current food level. And if your game is going to be replicated, you might want to go ahead and check rep notify right here, because you may want certain things to happen on the screen or with the UI whenever this current food changes. And when you do rep notify, it gives you this function right here. We're not going to mess with that today. We're also going to create another float called starting food. This is going to be the level that you're going to start with. And you're going to go ahead and select current food, go over here to category, highlight default, and write do not edit. Oops, spelled that wrong. Okay, because we don't want to ever edit that. All right. And actually, to guarantee that, we can make the variable private. And then let's create a function to get current food, and right click and type return, and then just plug that in. So whenever we want to access the player's current food, we'll just call this function, so we're not able to manipulate this. All right, so close that. And for starting food, let's just make it 100. Because it makes math easy. All right, and then what about the maximum level of food? Compile and save, max food, leave that at 0. And then we're going to need a function that's going to set up the player's stats or initialize them at the start of the game. So create a function and call it init underscore stats, okay? And we're going to actually set the value of current food in here, okay? And we're going to set the value of max food, and that's going to be whatever the starting food variable is. All right? So that when the game begins, whatever value you have for starting food will set the player's current food, unless you want the player to start starving, and it'll set max food for the rest of the game, okay? So I want you to go ahead and put max food in the do not edit category, select starting food, highlight the category on the right, and write customizable. All right, perfect. And then we're going to want this to initialize right away. So we're going to go ahead and add this here. Push S, left click for a sequence node, because there's some things we're going to actually do first. So let's go ahead and go back to our our first person character. So first person, blueprints, first person character. All right. And we're going to add this component that we created. All right. So click add and then type YTT and I get my stats component. Compile and save. And if you select that, you can see the categories that we created are here under the do not edit max food. So let's ignore that. And you can't see current food because we made it private. Okay. We can actually make max food private as well if we need. And under the stats heading, under customizable, starting food. So each player character or NPC character that you add this component to, you can change the starting food variable. All right, and it's not going to mess anything up and change the max food or current food. All right, let's go back to our stats component. And now we need a reference to the actor, the character that owns this component. So right click and type get owner. All right. And then we want a character reference. So we'll cast to the character. All right. And we can actually, if we want the first person character reference, we can actually just cast to that. But just in case we use this with AI characters, we won't for now. Drag out as character, promote that to a variable, and it's going to be type owning character reference. Owning character ref. And put that under the do not edit category. So now we have reference to whatever character owns this component, okay? So how do we initialize this so that the food is decreasing over time as the character is in the world? Well, we're going to do that using timers, all right? So first we're going to organize our functions. Under the init stats, we're going to change the category to init for initialize. And the get current food, we'll change that to food, okay? Being organized is a really good thing when you're coding. All right. So we are going to make a timer. So add a variable. And for the type of variable, it's going to be a timer handle. And we're going to call this, this is the way I name my timers. I go timer underscore, and this is going to be the food depletion timer or food loss over time. So I like to call that Degen food. And we're going to want to initialize this timer along with all the other timers. So I could just add it here to the begin play, but what I like to do is create a whole new function that initializes all my timers. Okay. So we'll initialize the timer here, and we'll get back to that in a second. Let's categorize that under timers. Oh, just kidding. That goes under initialize. There we go. Perfect. So now we need a function that's going to subtract food from our current food value. So let's create a function, and this is going to be called decrease food. And we'll categorize that under food. All right, so we're going to add an input, and that's going to be called amount. And this will stand for the amount of food that we are going to decrease. All right. So let's get our current food, and we are going to subtract this current amount. All right. And we are going to want to clamp that so it doesn't go below 0. So between 0 and whatever the maximum food value is. All right. And then whatever value we get back, we need to know, is it greater than 0, basically. If it's greater than 0, then we're not out of food yet. We're not starving. So we're going to go ahead and set the current food value, and the shortcut for grabbing a setter is hold Alt and just drag your variable into the graph. All right. So left click or hold B and do left click to get your condition. Connect the execution pins. All right, so if when we subtract this amount from our current food, if it's greater than 0, we want to go ahead and set our current food to that value. Bam, and that's done. What if it's not greater than 0? What if it's less than or equal to 0? Well, it shouldn't be less than, but what are we going to do? Well, we're going to set our current food to 0 because we're starving, right? And we're going to create a variable that's going to be a float. And it's going to be is starving. Okay? And we'll set that to true. And we'll worry about the consequences of that in a future tutorial. All right, so there we go. And that's it for our decrease food function. So now we still need to initialize, we still need to make a timer that decreases our food over time. Okay, so let's drag a setter out of our timer. And what we're going to do is right click and we're going to do set timer by function name. Okay. Connect the execution pin, connect this return value to the timer, compile and save. So this timer needs to run the decrease food timer. So go ahead and type the name of your function exactly. And remember, this name here has to be exactly what you wrote here. And we want it looping. We want it to keep running every so-and-so seconds, okay? So you could just have it decrease food every 1 second. That's totally fine. But I prefer to promote this to a variable and call it food degen time. Oops. That means I want the food to go down by a certain amount, whatever, in a certain time interval. So let's say I want it to go down every 5 seconds. Perfect. Let's go ahead. We need to initialize this. So let's drag our initialize timer handles into our begin play. Compile and save. So, and we also need to think about, well, how much is it going to go down over time? So we're going to create another function called, let's see, timer decrease food, and that's going to go under timers. This function is going to be our timer decrease food. There we go. And this timer is going to have our decrease food function, but what amount are we going to use? So promote that to a variable, and it's going to be food degen amount. Okay, compile and save. And let's say we want the food to go down by 10. Every 5 seconds it'll decrease by 10, which is a lot, but this is just for an example. All right, so timer decrease food, that's in there, and that's started right away. This is good. All right, so we are ready to test this out, but first let's do some organization. Okay. So let's go ahead and compile and save our first person character. All right, and we're not going to want to touch any of these. So this we're going to want to not edit. We're not going to want to edit that timer. And then these you can make customizable if you want. Yeah, maybe you want to play around with it. So we'll leave that under customizable. Compile and save, go back over here. There we go. So we can change how much food we start with, how often this amount is being taken away. So let's see if this works. First of all, we need to have a representation of the player's food that we can see, okay? So let's go ahead and go back to the tutorial, the stat system, right click, and we're gonna make a little user widget. So WBP for widget blueprint, and this is gonna be food bar UI. Let's double click and open this up. And we're going to want to have probably a border. Drag that in there. And let's see. I'm going to make this tint basically black. Okay, perfect. Compile and save. Probably going to want to have a size box. Actually, we'll wrap this in a size box. Go ahead and wrap your border in a size box. And we can make the width of the bar, let's say 300, and the height can be 20. And let's go ahead and select desired on screen. Okay, so that's our food bar. And now we need a progress bar. So drag that into the border, select the progress bar, highlight the name over here, and write food bar. Compile and save. There we go. And now we need to decide, well, what color do we want to fill this with? So I usually like brown for food, which maybe is weird, but is what it is. Or maybe I can use like an orangish color. There, that's not so bad. Compile and save. And let's see what that looks like. If you go to the % over here, you can slide this up and down. See? And that's what it's going to look like when it's working. For the bar background, I usually like it to be basically black. There we go. Compile and save. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. That's good enough. Okay, so now we need to decide, well, how are we going to represent the food on here? You know, we need to bind the % to something. Okay, so compile and save. The first thing you want to do is we need to get reference to this stats component, right? Because that's where the food variable is. So we're going to want to add a variable here, and we're going to add the stats component. There we go. And we're going to want the object reference. So this will be stats component. Okay, and we're going to want to set this elsewhere. So you need to check instance editable expose on spawn, because when we create, you know, this widget and put it on the screen, we're going to want to tell it what stats component is it going to use. Okay, for now, drag the stats component, and then you want to get current food, which remember we have a function for that, which actually I'm going to change this function to, we're going to make this a pure function because we're not changing anything. So compile and save. There we go. And that makes it better here. Compile and save. All right. And then we're going to get the max food, right? Because this is going to be the stats bar is from 0 to 1. So we're going to want to take the current food, divide it by the max food. Okay. And that's going to give us a number between close to 0 and 1. And then that's what we're going to want in the bar. Okay. It's also nice to have like a number representation. You know, you don't need it, but some people like that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap this size box with an overlay. Okay. And then we're going to grab a text box over here, and I'm going to drag that onto the overlay as well. I'm going to shrink this text because it's way too big. Let's see. Okay. And then I sometimes like to have an outline on my text, or at least a shadow so I can see it better. So I'll just go ahead and use an outline. And then I'm going to move it to the, move this to the right and then center it. Okay, cool. And then change this text to _P capital H for placeholder. So when you see that the placeholder shows up when you push play to test your game, you know that your code's not working because it didn't change. So let's try find a way to set this text, okay? So select this. We're going to call this text _ food amount. Or we could just do food. And then bind, create a binding. And it's the same thing that we did here. We are going to want to get the current food and the max food. So basically, since we want a text representation, I want you to drag out from the text and type format. And then you're going to do curly bracket, current food, close curly bracket, divided by space, curly bracket, max, close curly bracket. And when you do that, notice how you get two variables here that you need to decide. So drag out from the current food float, and you're going to want to do toText. There we go. And then we want, let's see, I want the maximum to be 3 in front of the decimal, and I don't want any decimal. All right, there we go. Copy that, paste it, so it's the same for the max food, and place that in here. There we go. So that will allow us to change our variables here. All right. So this should all be working just fine. Now we need to see this on the screen. So let's figure that out. I'm going to create a folder called UI. Actually, I'll do HUD. And I'm going to right click user interface, go to widget blueprint, user widget, WBP _ main HUD. And this is going to be our main HUD. You only need to do one thing in here right now is open it up, add a canvas panel, which is just basically an area that allows us to add widgets to. And I want to check that it's a variable, and then let's change the name to main HUD canvas so we can easily identify it. Compile and save. And let's close that. So we want to add our food bar to our main HUD. First we got to get the main HUD on the screen, right? So let's go back to our player character, and you can add it to the main screen in your player controller, which I can go over another time. You can add it in your main character. You can add it in a component. Right now, just for ease, we're going to just do a begin play on the player. And hold S, left click for sequence, because we may want to add a bunch of things on the begin play. And let's add the HUD. So how do we do that? Create widget. Select that, and let's select that main HUD that we created. There you go. Let's turn that into a variable because we may want to actually reference that at some time. So main HUD _ ref. Perfect. And let's add that to the player's viewport. And just to make sure that we know this is going to be working, let's open up our main HUD again, and let's put a little text up here. Let's see, add a text. We'll put it in the top right. And I'll call this YouTube tutorial. Make it a little darker, a little lighter. There. Just so we'll be able to see that on the screen and know that, okay, this is our HUD. Our HUD is actually being used. Perfect. Let's close that out. All right. So we've added the main HUD to the viewport. What about adding the food bar? We still need to do that. So one way that we can do that is we can do it on the stats component. And so let's create another function, and it'll be called add food bar UI to main HUD. And you can name things whatever you want, and I'm going to put that under the UI. Okay. There we go. Compile and save. So let's create a widget, right? Because we got to create the food widget so we can add it. Okay. And it's asking us right now for its stats component. Remember that, because that's the component here where we're getting all the values. And remember, we are in the stats component class. So just get a reference to self, and there you go. Very simple. And we don't want to add this to the viewport. We want to add this to the main HUD. Where did we add the main HUD? In the first person character. So we need to get a reference to the first person character and gain access to this HUD reference, okay? All right. So on the first person character, just to prevent any weird things happening with the HUD variable, I'm going to create a function called getMainHUD. It's going to be a pure function, and it's going to return the HUD reference if it's valid. So if it's true, if it's actually been added, if it's there, it's going to give us the reference. If not, it's going to return nothing. Okay, and then I'm actually going to make this main HUD reference private. Excuse me. All right, so back to our stats component. Let's get our owning character reference. Remember, our owning character reference is, it's not our player character, so we actually need to get our player character. So let's make it easier on ourselves. And let's see, get the owning character reference, convert it to a validated get, because if this is valid, if it's real, not being destroyed, we're going to cast to our first person character, and then we're going to create another variable, and it's going to be our first person character reference. Compile and save. And this is all happening on the begin play. It'll happen once. You don't want to cast a lot because it'll slow things down. So if we just do it once, put that in do not edit, that's it. We can keep using that variable. So let's go back to adding the food bar, delete that owning character reference, grab our first person character, and remember, this is where we created the HUD. So let's get the main HUD. See? Easy as that. Let's convert this to a validated get just in case. Okay. All right. And let's see, we're gonna get the canvas panel. Remember we created that. There we go. And we're gonna drag out from here and do add child to canvas. And the child we're gonna add is that food bar. Bam. And then drag out from here and set auto size. Oops. Okay, check that box, compile and save. And we need to decide where on the screen we want it. So we'll set the anchors. And I believe this would be, so 0, 0, all zeros is basically the top left of the screen. So we'll leave that there for now and see what it looks like. So now, in order to add the food bar to the main HUD, we need to call this function. So let's go ahead and just call it here. Let's see, add food bar to main HUD. There we go. So this adds the food bar to the main HUD as soon as we play the character. So let's see if all of this works. So basically what we should see is our main HUD should get added. Our food bar should be added in the top left. And it should be draining over time. So let's cross our fingers and see if that works. Push play. Push F11. So I think our food bar is there, but it's okay. Let's see, what did we mess up? I wonder if I need a delay here. There we go. So we just needed a delay because this begin play on the stats component is happening probably at the same time as this. And this HUD widget hadn't been created yet. So we need this delay here. All right. Okay. And if you watch in the top left, our food is going down. Now it's at 80. Not pushing or doing anything, it's just going down. Now it's at 70, and it should stop at 0 because we clamped it so it won't go below 0. And it's going to check the variable is starving to true. So this system can be pretty powerful. You could make a function or an event dispatcher that listens for when the player is suddenly starving, and that could trigger another timer function that decreases the player's health. Or it can just trigger something else. It can trigger hunger sounds, you know. You could do whatever you want. But basically this is it. This is how you make a stat system. This is how you make it degenerate. This is not the only way to do it, of course. This is just a compilation of various things I've learned through my time watching YouTube tutorials, and it's what I use in my game. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more of this or see a complete survival game series. I'm happy to do that as well. Have a good day.